Welcome to this video lecture on tribal folklore. This is Dr. Sumohan Bandopadhyay from Department of Anthropology, Vidyasagar University, West Bengal. Folklore is an important part of culture. Now we are going to talk about tribal folklore. Before detailing tribal folklore, let us know what is meant by folklore, what are its features, what is the history of development of folklore in nutshell and tribal folklore in detail, and also what are the different types of folklore, that means classification of folklore, with special reference to the tribal folklore, and also some examples of tribal folklore in Indian context. So this is in a nutshell the topic we are going to deal with. Now, folklore is not only one of the important aspects of culture, it is also a culture universal. William Bascom, one of the very prominent scholars of folklore studies, said that the folklore is a part of man's learned traditions and customs as well as a part of his social heritage. So far, the technical use of the term folklore is concerned, it can be said that it predated technical use of the word culture in anthropology. The word folklore was introduced into English world in its technical sense by William J. Thoms in the Athenaeum in the year 1846. By this word folklore, Thoms meant that the folklore includes the manners, customs, observances, superstitions, ballads, proverbs of the olden time. The word folklore is also defined by other scholars. One of the noted folklorists, Alan Dundes, gave a lengthy definition of folklore. What Dundes said? Dundes said that folklore includes myths, legends, folktales, proverbs, riddles, chants, charms, blessings, curses, oaths, insult, retorts, taunts, teases, tongue twisters, greeting, and leave-taking formulas. Folklore also includes folk costume, folk dance, folk drama, folk art, belief, folk song, folk medicine, instrumental music, folk speech, folk metaphors. Folk poetry ranges from oral epics to autograph book verse, epitaphs, latrinalia. So you can easily understand what are the diverse elements of folklore. Dundes also continued to add that this folklore include some other elements for example, folk games, gestures, symbols, prayers, practical jokes, folk etymologies, food recipes, quilt and embroidery design, house type, barn, fence type, street vendors' cries. So all these aspects. So you can find that the folklore includes a number of different activities, day-to-day activities of the common people. Again, if we also take from Dundays, we find some other elements which are included in the folklore. For example, the mnemonic devices, envelope sealers, traditional comments made after certain body emissions. So you can see the variety as well. Apart from these, there are festivals, certain special day observances, certain customs which are also included in the category of folklore. Apart from this lengthy definition, we have some other very brief but very important definition of folklore. For example, we can refer to the definition of folklore given by Sims and Stephens. What Sims and Stephens say about folklore? For them, folklore is informally learned unofficial language about the world, about ourselves, our communities, our beliefs, our cultures, and our tradition. These traditions and these aspects, which are expressed through creatively by the medium of word or music or custom, also through actions, through behaviors and other material forms. Folklore is interactive, dynamic process of creating, communicating and performing as we share that knowledge with other people. So it is very important definition. Now if we see the word folklore, we find that there are two important components of this word. One is folk, another is lore. The word folk is said to have been originated from the German word Volk, that means people. And lore is basically the verbal expression, knowledge, tradition, beliefs and activities of these people which we call folk. Now the concept of folklore is also informed by the concept of folk. So the lores of the folk is in a sense folklore. But there is a great debate on the concept of folk and folklore, because some people do not agree that folk and tribal are same. Even in government institutions, these two words, tribal and folk, are separately used. But scholars like Robert Redfield, in his book Folk Culture of Yucatan, has discussed at length about the criteria of folk, in which Redfield is telling us that the tribal communities in one of the settlements he studied, the name of the settlement is Tushik. In that settlement, the tribal communities are characterized by the following features. What are the features? The maintenance of a tribal political organization, which is closely associated with religious institutions and sacred sanctions, and much greater economic interdependence of local community. So this local community or local, the concept of local is very much important in the context of folk or folk community. And in fact we find that Redfield included both tribal and peasants in the category of folk. In this regard, we can also take the definition given by Ralph Linton in his famous book, that is the Study of Man. What Linton is telling us? According to Linton, folk cultures are born by small, closely integrated social units or such units which have already worked out satisfactory mutual adjustments. In such cultures, new items are not appearing with any great frequency. So it's a kind of stability. He's talking about small, closely integrated social unit. They have a kind of mutual adjustment, a stability, and these cultures constitute the core of this culture constitute almost the whole of the culture. So it's a kind of homogeneity in their cultural activities in a small group. So by definition, we can easily understand that the folk is including both the tribal and the peasant people. But we find another very interesting view about folk, and that is given by Alan Dundes in his famous paper, Who Are the Folk? In this discussion, he is telling us that we all are folk based on the similarity of a particular feature which is common to common to us. Accordingly, this concept of folk and folklore has been changed from time to time, and we can easily understand that going by this feature, the tribals are well included in the category of folklore. Category of folk. So the lore of these folk, that of the tribal people, constitute the tribal folklore. And it is a matter of context. The folklore occurring in the context of the tribal communities is tribal folklore. Now the point is that what are the features of this folklore in general and tribal folklore in particular? Now if we go by the features, we find that the tribal folklore is characterized by the following features. What are these following features? First of all, folklore is basically or ideally orally transmitted from generation to generation. There is no text or script that these folkloric materials are written. Usually through interaction in the group, the folkloric elements are transmitted. Secondly, folklore is usually a kind of spontaneous creation by the people when they express their feeling or instruction at the face of any temptation to their senses, and it comes from them quite naturally. But it is also undeniable that this spontaneity later also is transformed into a kind of regularity owing to some commercial and other reasons, and accordingly they perform tribal dance, tribal song for the programs and so on. But in essence, they are very much spontaneous in nature. Thirdly, the folklore is characterized by anonymous creation. Usually we do not know who created a particular riddle or particular folk rhyme or a particular proverb in a community. So it is a part of the cultural literacy of that community. Fourthly, the folklore is owned by the community. Owned, this word I am using, but collectively. So it is the part of their collective common ownership or cultural property. It may be tangible, it may be intangible. Folklore, another feature is that folklore is also called a local expressive tradition of culture. And it is very much particular to the people of a region. For example, we may talk about Jharkhandi folklore, we may talk about Oriya folklore, we may talk about Bengali folklore. At the same time, we may talk about Santal folklore, we may talk about Bhumij folklore, and often it is seen that these region and community folklore overlap. But basically, folklore is more local. Another interesting feature is that folklore can be said to be the autoethnography of the people. A community or a member of a community talks about itself through folklore. The Santal or Mundra folk songs, if we take the examples, actually reflect the essential condition of their existence and their feeling and emotion in a particular context. So they talk about themselves. So it's a kind of autoethnographic account for the community. Now, we can also say that this folklore is created by the people, on the people, and for the people. Folklore, though have a stability for certain time or considerable time, it is also true that folklore is a living or dynamic tradition. It reflects the time and context that a particular community or a people experiences. For this, the emerging genre of folklore often confuse us whether it can be properly categorized as a folk form or not. But we must keep in mind that folklore is always a changing, always an emerging kind of expression by the people. Another feature is that folklore is created by a folk which shows a kind of homogeneity. This homogeneity may be derived from their solidarity because of belonging to a particular community or ethnic group, or it may be a locality where face-to-face relationship is seen. So there may be several features, but folklore is characterized, no doubt characterized by a kind of homogeneity of the group of people who creates the folklore. Now, understanding the features of folklore or tribal folklore, we may try to know what are the particular features Vidyarthi and Rai in their famous book mention about tribal folklore. Vidyarthi and Rai, they say that the folklore of the tribal people reflects the mythical tales and stories of explanation of their origin. The folk tales of the tribes reflect the impact of the supernatural world, supernatural beings. For example, they have given the name of Utlen serpent stories of the Khasis. These folkloric elements also contain some moral stories and instructions which are important aspect of the tribal culture. They also mention that we find among them cumulative songs, and we have also came to know from the study by Sharat Chandra Mitra, another very important anthropologist, folklorist, that there are cumulative folk tales among the folk people of the country. There are other features such as the kind of connections between folklore and the rituals, sorcery, and other things, or incantations. So these are intricately related in the tribal folklore. The tribal folklore, say for example, folk songs, are sung in the religious as well as in the social occasions. The tribal stories, several festive events are intricately linked. If we take a tribal festival, say for example Karam or Karma, we find a story element into it. So these are the characteristic feature, or rather features, of tribal folklore in India. Now, if we classify or try to classify the folklore, tribal folklore, what are the divisions we will find? Broadly, the tribal folklore can be divided into material and non-material folklore. But if we go by the genre and types, we find certain divisions in tribal folklore. For example, folk literature or formalized folklore, one division, which include folk tale, folk songs, ballads, rhymes, proverbs, riddles, etc. There are performative folklore, another category, which include folk drama, dance, acrobatics, etc. Number 3 is the folk art and craft. Several varieties are there, from weaving by Chief Baraik, iron smelting by Oshu tribe, basket making of Mahalis, or Gond painting or wall painting by the Santals. So these are all part of these elements of this category of folk art and craft. There is another division which is folk belief and ritual action. So it is linked to the religion. There are sacred narratives, rituals, customs, folk deities. These are all linked to this category. There is another category we can find, which is the indigenous knowledge and indigenous technology, which is very important division of tribal folklore. And last but not the least is the category of folk medicine. The folk medicinal knowledge is also a part of indigenous knowledge system, but it deserves a special mention because of their importance. So from the above discussions, or the discussion so far I have made, we have known what is meant by how folk and folklore can be defined, what are the features of folklore, and what are the different divisions or types of folklore. Now we can concentrate on how the folkloric study or tribal folklore study developed in our country in particular and in general. Now if we see the development of folklore or folklore study, we should go trace its roots to the in a more formal sense to the antiquarian approach. And in antiquarian approach, the scholars in the West searched for the elements of the good old days, antiquities, and For example, we can name the scholar, British scholar, Bishop Thomas Percy, who collected the Old English poetry. There were William and Jacob Grimm brothers. They were the first European scholars to approach the study of folklore in a more formalized, in a more methodical, systematic way. And they developed some folk theory, they classified the folk tales. So Grimm brothers made a great impact. There were other scholars like E.B. Tylor, James Fraser, who also studied the folk elements as well. But more important name in this regard is Franz Boas, who was directly involved in the study and collection of the folk tales and other folkloric elements of the tribal people. And in his book, General Anthropology, that he edited, he wrote the folklore section himself, and there he mentioned about the folklore of Eskimo, Inuit people, Tsimshian, Arunta tribe of Australia, Kwakiutl of North America. And he suggested that these literary creations must be considered analogous to modern novelistic literatures. And he also informed us that this analysis of folklore, folk tales particularly, that these are very important things which occur in human society and which also reflect the events which take place in human society. So by studying the folklore or elements of folklore, we can have a glimpses of the people, of a particular people or group of people. So Franz Boas, who also edited the journal Folklore for a long period of time and a very renowned anthropologist, his role is immense, his impact is immense in the development of folklore. In our country, the study of folklore started with the direct intervention of European scholars. And we found that Hugh Fraser studied the folklore in eastern Gorakhpur as early as in 1883. There were a number of studies by administrator turned academician or academically inclined administrators who collected a large body of folklore material. Apart from them, some other scholars, for example, P.O. Bodin, who collected huge material on the Santals. We also find the study by Houghton on the Lusai, Anderson on Kachari. So these foreign scholars collected huge materials on the formalized as well as belief-based folklore, and their approach basically was initially to study the region and then genre and then community. So this way they approach the folklore material from different angles. If we try to understand the development of folklore, tribal folklore studies in India, we can locate or identify certain specific trends. One is that it is initially a study of the community, ethnography of a tribe, and in doing the ethnography of tribe, the anthropologist or the scholar who is conducting the study was also collecting the materials, folklore materials of these people. For example, if we take the Mundas and their country by S. C. Rai, there are materials or a section in which S. C. Rai dealt with the folkloric elements of the people. Next development in the study of folklore, tribal folklore particularly, we find a genre-based approach. that a particular or single genre, for example, folk music or folk art or myth or folk tale, a particular genre-based approach was taken. Now, this genre-based approach has again two trends. One is a single genre-based, another is multiple genre-based. For example, Verrier Edwin undertook a number of such genre-based studies. For example, we can refer to his studies on the myth in Odisha and Northeast India, tribal art of Middle India and Nepha region, folk song of Maikal Hills and Chhattisgarh, folk tales of Mahakoshal, folk poetry of the Gonds, so on and so forth. And this trend was later also carried as we find the study of Santal music by Onkar Prasad. There he studied the Santal music actually is an extension of or prolongation of human speech, and it also reflected the social categories in a sense that the class motifs of the Santal song bring to us. So this link between a folkloric genre, folk music and social categories is unique kind of approach, and it is a single genre based approach in folklore. But we also find multiple genre based approach, one by Ram and Ram studied in the folk ballads, the oral epics, tribal songs of the Bastar region. In this study, he took a number of genres of a particular region. So this is a very important trend of study. If we try to identify third major trend of tribal folklore study, it is the theme-based study. That means a particular issue or theme that is reflected through the folklore of the tribal community was taken into consideration. For example, Shoumen Sen studied the Khashi Jayantiya folklore in order to understand how the folklore was contributing in the shaping of identity and history of the Khashi Jayantiya people. And with this kind of thematic approach, there may be certain sub-thematic areas. For example, now the above study aims at historical reconstruction, understanding of ethnicity, understanding of ethnohistory, understanding of hegemony. So a number of issues as well as aesthetics were considered in such kind of theme-based approach. And theme-based approach, in a sense, is the latest trend of tribal folklore studies. For example, in a study done by Chatterjee in Purulia, where she studied the Chou dance, and on the basis of her study, he identified Purulia as a folkloric region. So this performative aspect or performative approach in the study of folklore and the theme of identity is a very important trend of the current folklore study. Now, if we try to understand the kind of change or kind of theoretical change that took place with regard to the folklore study, we find that it was a kind of change from evolutionism, solar mythology study, archetype study, or urform study, from diffusionism. At present, the trend is more on to study the performance. How the performance theory is influencing the folklore study, shaping the community identity, how it is helping in the negotiation with their political demand, and so on and so forth. And also This study is linked with the understanding of invented tradition that is reflected to folklore. In this case, we cite the examples of Gond art or some of the ritual or pilgrimage tradition recently developed among the Santals. So this invented tradition, this performative approach is representing the current trend of tribal folklore study. With this, we have already understood what sort of the panorama the study of tribal folklore brings before us. It is an essential aspect of our understanding of the society and culture. And the orality is going side by side in our written cultural tradition that we must know. And many of the tribal communities are becoming a part of the written tradition from the oral tradition. So now the intricate relationship between this oral and written tradition in the context of tribal folklore study is very important. Because the tribal folklore study will give us understanding of their life, of their culture, of their religion, of their economy, many more things, as well as their sense of aesthetics. Therefore, the tribal folklore holds a very important position in our study of the tribal communities.